Thank you for tuning in. You're watching Foreign Correspondents. I'm Min Sun-hee with our panel of foreign journalists. Welcome to the show.
Nice to be back again. Thanks.
President Moon Jae-in began his 5-year term on the 10th of May, and in this edition of Foreign Correspondents, we take a look at the man who has pledged to offer a strong sense of stability after months of turmoil here in this part of the world. On May 9th, Korea elected its 19th president.
사랑하고 존경하는 국민 여러분, 2017년 5월 10일 오늘 대한민국이 다시 시작합니다. 나라를 나라답게 만드는 대역사가 시작됩니다. 이 길에 함께 주십시오. 저의 신명을 바쳐 일하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
In the wee hours of the 10th, President Moon visited Gwanghwamun to thank his supporters, and there he promised a new start for the country.
위대한 대한민국, 정의로운 대한민국, 자랑스러운 대한민국, 당당한 대한민국, 그 대한민국의 자랑스러운 대통령이 되겠습니다.
At around 8 a.m., after he was confirmed the winner, the president visited the offices of Liberty Korea Party and the People's Party, among others, and vowed to communicate with them and work together in state governance. At noon, President Moon attended a simple inauguration ceremony which lasted for only 20 minutes and started his first day in office. Stories about Korea's new president were also reported widely by global media organizations. CNN reported on the election results under the headline South Korea election, Moon Jae-in declared winner, and looked at how Seoul's North Korea policy might change under the new leader. Japan's Asahi Shimbun described the streets of Gwanghwamun exploding with joy in the early hours of the 10th as Moon's victory became evident. The Financial Times ran the headline Moon Jae-in offers South Korea stability after turmoil and projected the country will be more stable with Moon's election. President Moon Jae-in started his first day in office breaking away from conventions. The Korean public will be watching closely as the new leader looks to bring reforms and unity to the country. Predictions that the Democratic Party candidate Moon Jae-in would win the election was quite common even before the voting began. What do you suppose made him appear appealing to the public as a presidential candidate?
Well, I think his experience and his name recognition. He had run in 2012 against Park Geun-hye and lost.
패배를 인정합니다. 하지만 저의 실패이지 새 정치를 바라는 모든 분들의 실패가 아닙니다.
And so he had just an identity in Korean politics and a legitimacy because of that race. He also has a great personal story, served in the military with distinction. He's a best-selling author, opposition leader, and you know, a relatively charismatic, interesting politician.
I think we need to look at what happened previously, that this was a snap election and a way for the country to sort of put the corruption scandal of former President Park Geun-hye behind her. I think those were really the main elements of the election. I think just about any Democratic candidate would have been able to win the election.
I see. So it was because the Conservative Party had been in power for a decade and it was time to give the Liberal Democrats a chance then. Election results showed much divide among the Koreans with regard to their votes, depending on age and region. What can President Moon do to establish a sense of solidarity among his people?
There is quite a bit of anxiety in the South Korean public about Moon Jae-in's North Korea policy, but I think in terms of uniting the country, immediately I think he took a step in trying to do that, in visiting with the other candidates that had lost the election of the opposition parties to him. So I think he understands his mandate is somewhat limited in that he only won 40% of the electorate, and that he has just 119 seats out of the 300-member National Assembly, the Democratic Party. So I think he understands that he needs to build a political coalition in order to, implement his vision for South Korean both foreign and domestic policies.
On the actual day of the election, once the results were out, there was a picture of Arirang giving President Moon Jae-in a kiss on the cheek, and this picture was taken up by many members of the foreign media. What are your thoughts on that, Frank?
Well, I saw some other media footage, some other Reuters footage of Moon Jae-in receiving flowers from some children, and they also, embraced and perhaps gave him a peck on the cheek. Hopefully Moon will use that as a way to show that he's interested in developing unity and working together with opposition political forces.
Right.
I thought it just reflected the pure joy of the moment, the location that they were in. They're, they're not ideologically exactly aligned, but they're closely aligned. They're from the same party, and it's a victory for the party. But I thought it was another show of unity, as Frank mentioned, not just in his own party, where the primary candidates came together at the end.
In this next report, I walk you through President Moon's political path prior to taking the reins of the country and the tasks he faces now that he is at the top office. Korea's 19th President Moon Jae-in has promised change in the country.
오늘부터 나라를 나라답게 만드는 대통령이 되겠습니다. 구시대의 잘못된 관행과 과감히 결별하겠습니다. 대통령부터 새로워지겠습니다.
Moon Jae-in was born in January 1953 in Koje of Gyeongsang-namdo province as the son of North Korean refugees who fled to the south during the Korean War. Upon entering Kyunghee University Law School in 1972, he joined the students' movement fighting for democracy. In 1980, he passed the bar exam, and by 1982, he had joined former President Roh Moo-hyun as a human rights lawyer. After former President Roh Moo-hyun's death in 2009, Moon Jae-in began to gain recognition within political circles. And in 2012, he launched a career in politics in earnest. His first run for president in 2012 ended in defeat. But in his next run, Moon Jae-in came out the winner.
국민만 보고 바른 길로 가겠습니다. 위대한 대한민국, 정의로운 대한민국, 자랑스러운 대한민국, 당당한 대한민국, 그 대한민국의 자랑스러운 대통령이 되겠습니다.
On day one in office, the president signaled he would live up to these pledges by issuing his first order to create a jobs committee. On top of keeping his campaign promises, untangling a number of foreign policy issues will also be key. But the most important task ahead will be living up to the Korean public's hopes and expectations by presenting a new style of governance.
오늘부터 저는 국민 모두의 대통령이 되겠습니다. 저를 지지하지 않았던 국민 한 분 한 분도 저의 국민이고 우리의 국민으로 승비하겠습니다.
While running for office, President Moon campaigned under the slogan, "A reliable president will make this country a proper country." Koreans nationwide have high hopes for the new president and how he will reshape the country's future. On his first day in office, President Moon Jae-in called for the launch of a job committee assigned with the task of job creation, and this was at the top of his 10 campaign pledges. Now, I'm sure you've looked at some of his campaign pledges. Matt, what strikes you most about some of the pledges he's made?
Well, one thing that strikes me most about his pledges are on North Korea and on THAAD, for example. it's hard to get a concrete, idea of what exactly his position is going to be. I think that actually may have helped him in the election as a contrast to the other candidates. But clearly from his inaugural speech, he says he wants to focus on economic issues first. And from just average Koreans that I talked to about this election, that came up time and time again. Concern about both their own job security and their children's future job security, concern about wages, concern about household debt, and concern about long hours. So that, I think he would serve himself well to focus on that. Now, he may be limited in what he can do there, but rhetorically it will help him to talk about it.
I think that shows sort of the disparity between the coverage of foreign media and the coverage of domestic media. Foreign media is obsessed with the North Korean issue, and they'll, focus their coverage on Moon's position on North Korea, whereas domestic media, and I think the South Korean public, is at least equally concerned, if not more concerned, with his position on the economy, the sort of lagging South Korean economy. And I think that, he's being quite pragmatic and maybe making the right decision in focusing on that.
Right. What do you believe is President Moon's greatest strength, given his past experiences? His past experiences as a human rights lawyer, as a former chief of staff to the late President Roh Moo-hyun, a member of the National Assembly. Koichi, what do you see as his strength?
Well, I think he has a good experience of running government as a chief of staff, and during his period in the office, he was in charge of very difficult deal, like FTA with US or summit with North Korea. So I think that is a strong point of President Moon.
Moon was featured just prior to the election on the cover of Time magazine. A lot was made of that here in the South Korean media, and the term that was used to describe him was the negotiator. And I think given what we talked about his mandate and about the disunity maybe and divisiveness of the South Korean electorate, that his attributes as a negotiator are going to be put to the test in his administration.
Many agree that it's a tough road ahead for Korea, regardless of who takes the reins. What perhaps is one of the biggest challenges that face President Moon Jae-in? Koichi.
First, that issue, because you have to make a difficult deal both with China, Xi Jinping, and Trump, US. So obviously it's really difficult. And also there are still divided people's feeling within South Korea. This is also a difficult task to solve.
Right, definitely. And staying with the issue of security, how do you envision the Moon administration approaching tensions with North Korea, Matt?
Well, I think we're going to see a difference in tone, at least initially, depending on how events play out. I think we're going to see an attempt to increase dialogue, perhaps more cross-border relations, perhaps more economic cooperation, as a way to I guess, sort of soften the tension a bit. On the nuclear issue, I think South Korea is somewhat handicapped in what it can do. I think the North Koreans probably want to deal with Washington and China on that issue. But I think he can soften the playing field a little bit by lowering the volume and lowering the tension level, and that might open up the possibility for broader dialogue with Washington or a better relationship with China.
I absolutely agree with what Matt said. I think South Korea can play the carrot to Washington's stick, and there's been a lot of talk, and I share this analysis myself, that he is going to have problems in dealing with Washington and developing a strategy and policy toward North Korea, but I do think it can work in that he can, soften the rhetoric and perhaps have more success with North Korea in toning things down, toning down their number of provocations, and at the same time perhaps toning down the U.S.'s behavior and Trump's rhetoric in the region and get the two parties closer to negotiations.
Right. Let's talk a bit more about the Moon administration's potential relations with the Trump administration. How do you see that relationship going, Frank?
Well, I think, you know, prior to the election, there were a lot of concerns about how he would deal with Donald Trump and the unpredictability of Donald Trump. There are a couple of major issues that Trump has said that he wants to deal with. One is North Korea, of course, that we've talked about. The other is the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. Getting to some agreement on that is going to be really challenging, given that Moon is a Democratic president. So he, was probably a little bit, hesitant about the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement itself, the one that's in place now, and perhaps wanted that to be negotiated a little bit differently initially. So for Trump to now say that he wants to renegotiate that agreement on terms that are even more favorable to Washington from a South Korean perspective, that's going to be a difficult task as well.
Right. Matt, just out of curiosity, how is the U.S. media, the American media, covering this story about the potential relations between Seoul and Washington now that the Moon administration is in power?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of the coverage comes through the prism of North Korea, and so a lot of the real issues that are going on in South Korea are not covered as much by the foreign media, especially the American media, as opposed to maybe the Japanese media or the Chinese media. But I think there is a little bit of concern here and in the U.S. that Trump may say or do something to provoke both the South or the North or China, and that seems to be a constant tension point in the American press in general, not just in the coverage of South Korea, concern about what Trump might do or say. And I think and we were talking about the relationship between Moon and Trump, it may serve him well to go to Washington, because we've seen a pattern when Trump has heated rhetoric about an issue and he meets face to face with the top stakeholder on that issue, it changes his tune. So that could be a smart play for Moon.
Certainly we saw that with Xi Jinping and his visit to China. Everything changed, like, prior to the election of Donald Trump, there was a lot of rhetoric about labeling China as a currency manipulator, and then after the summit with Xi Jinping, it's almost like they're best friends. So I think, again, what Matt mentioned, Moon going to Washington really can settle relations between Seoul and the United States.
I don't know how good President Moon's golf game is, but if he took his golf clubs and they went to Mar-a-Lago together, that could probably smooth relations a lot.
Right. Let's talk about Seoul's relations with Tokyo then, Koichi. How do you envision the two countries moving along?
Well, I hope it goes well, of course, but this, historical issues and these things will keep going on. So the key is how to maintain relationship with this problem in hand. For Japanese government, the key issue is 2015's Comfort Women Agreement, and I understand how Korean people feel about it, but for me, it's not good enough, but it was still a progress. So we should upgrade that agreement instead of terminate it. That's what I think about Japan-ROK relationship in Moon Jae-in Abe era.
I see. What about Seoul's relations with Beijing? I mean, Seoul faces fallout from its decision to deploy THAAD here. How do you see that relationship progressing under the Moon administration?
Well, I think that's really the biggest security challenge. Moon has said that he's going to negotiate with China and with the United States over the deployment of THAAD. He took an ambiguous position during the campaign, whether he would ask for THAAD to be removed or have it removed from South Korea. It was kind of hurriedly deployed against the wishes of many activists, including the Won Buddhists of that region. I've been down to Seongju many times and talked to people there. So that will be I think the main stumbling block, as we've seen the economic retaliation from Beijing against South Korean companies operating in China. Negotiating his way out of that is going to be very difficult to please the stakeholders here in South Korea.
Right. At his inauguration ceremony, President Moon spoke about the importance of constructive dialogue, of communication, especially with the press, and claimed that he would directly speak to members of the press regarding matters of importance. How do you envision his ties with members of the media in the future, Matt?
Well, as we know from the Park Geun-hye administration, press conferences were relatively rare. They were scripted affairs with few questions, very formal. It will be interesting to see if he, on occasion does regular press conferences, and it would be lovely if the foreign press were invited. But the fact that he mentioned that he would speak to the public more regularly about issues that are of interest in the news, signals another rhetorical change from the previous administration. We'll see, though, if events, if there is a scandal or if there is difficulty in things that he doesn't want to talk about, whether that policy changes.
Right. Frank, as a journalist, what do you believe is an ideal relationship between a leader of a country and the media?
Well, I think it has to be a healthy adversarial relationship, when I go to news conference, if it's government officials, I'll ask them the most difficult question that I can think of. That's my job, is to have that healthy adversarial relationship. It's our job to be a check on administrative and government power. I do hope he does follow through on some of his pledges toward the press. He said that he's going to release a 24-hour schedule of his activities. He said he's going to move his office to Gwangwon Square, and that he's going to engage the South Korean public in regular debates, taking those types of positions. I think I look upon this as another opportunity, and I look upon his potential relationship with the media optimistically.
Right. What political style should President Moon adopt to put to rest fears of the public of the possibility of a repeat of the former administration's failures, Koichi?
Looking at the press conference or his remarks, I think he's doing very well, because my Korean friends are all fed up with past administration's authoritarian type of politics, and clearly President Moon said that he will abolish that kind of culture, so I think he should keep on doing that.
Matt, what about you?
Part of it's rhetorical. It's not seeming authoritarian, as Park Geun-hye sometimes did, not seeming aloof from the people, seeming, as someone that you might want to have, in your home or have a conversation with, as opposed to someone that you revere, which is the previous administration, I think, sometimes sought that kind of an image. It'll be interesting to see, how his administration proceeds. Another thing he can do is, try to stay out of trouble, not have meetings with Chaebol leaders where they discuss funding and and policy decisions. Delegate that to aides, or do away with that altogether,
right,
to stay out of trouble.
Frank, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with these guys. I think he'll have a little bit more success, perhaps, in staying out of trouble in terms of the collusion and corruption that happened in the past. Often that has been generated by the people surrounding the president, not the president him or herself. So that's an area that he needs to be careful of as well.
Right. Well, today we talked about the results of the election that took place last week, and about what lies ahead for President Moon Jae-in. How do you assess today's discussion, Matt?
It was a great discussion. It was really a perilous time for South Korea in the last 6 months, and now it seems that one election can have this sort of cathartic effect where there's hope that things might change. But it may only take a few weeks before we start talking about some of the structural issues that are still a problem for South Korean society, and whether Moon will be able to deal with those is still an open question. But it's great and an honor to be in this country following this and being able to discuss it with you also.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on the part about it being an honor to be here. I've been here for many years, and there's nothing more encouraging than covering a free and open democratic election. And being here for again such a period of time, I feel somewhat invested in South Korea now. So when I saw Moon Jae-in taking the oath of office and the national anthem being played, it felt really wonderful, really empowering for the country, and for me to get sort of behind South Korea's future.
At his inauguration ceremony, President Moon Jae-in pledged to be a communicative leader, one who is also compassionate and congenial. It is with much hope that we look forward to these words of intention. Thank you for watching.